Thank you, Mr. President. The case of Tropical Storm Ondoy has also demonstrated that Metro Manila is not exempt from the possibility of severe flooding, given that it is the engine of the country's growth. Disasters that are centered in Metro Manila are a cause for alarm, as these will certainly adversely affect the entire country's economy. My dear colleagues, Mr. President, the opening statement that I just read was quoted from the primer on the Greater Manila Area Risk Analysis Plan, which forms part of the interagency project funded by the Australian government. Mr. President, this Friday, September 26, marks the 5th anniversary of the onslaught of Tropical Storm Ondoy, or Quetzana, as known in the international community. Also incidentally, the United Nations just held yesterday the 2014 Climate Change Summit in New York City. And I take the floor today to report to this august chamber the findings of your Committee on Public Works on the resolutions filed, Senate Resolution number 6 and Senate Resolution number 28, that call upon the committee to inquire in aid of legislation on the current flood problem of Metro Manila and the initiatives planned by government to manage and solve those problems. Indeed, as our Ondoy experience has demonstrated, even Metro Manila, considered as the main financial capital and economic driver of the country, is not exempt from the crippling effect of these environmental disasters. Our unprecedented experience during Ondoy on September 26, 2009 was another poignant reminder of that. It was a terrifying and stupefying wake-up call not only to the extreme effects of high-intensity and non-stop precipitation as a consequence of climate change, but also to the vulnerability of our communities to such effects. The destructiveness of Tropical Storm Ondoy was not so much due to the strength and gustiness of its winds. It merely packed 85 km/h winds and gusted up to 100 km/h. In fact, when Ondoy hit, Metro Manila was merely placed under storm warning signal number 1. The enormity of the effects of Ondoy lay in its precipitation and its delivery, or the amount of rainfall and its concentration over a short period of time. According to Pagasa, Ondoy poured over Metro Manila a whopping 392 millimeters of rainfall, even surpassing the 15-year average amount of rainfall for the entire month of September, or 364 millimeters, in just a span of 6 hours. In short, in just a period of 6 hours, Ondoy had already poured over Metro Manila more than the amount of rainfall that it regularly receives for the entire month of September. As a result of the flooding, a substantial part of Metro Manila was paralyzed. Cell phone cameras captured never-before-seen images, horrific scenes of up-to-the-roof height floods, of deep rivers overflowing, inundated malls and urban areas. We have seen elevated parking structures of malls become virtual rescue places for motor vehicles lucky enough to avoid submergence, in the same way that malls offered safe haven for some of our people. 37 road sections in Metro Manila had been rendered impassable to both vehicles and pedestrians. Business operations, schools, and other essential public services were stalled, as did expensive equipment, machinery, and even motor vehicles. In final analysis, Ondoy cost some 11 billion pesos worth of total damage to our infrastructure and agriculture. We suffered 464 deaths, 529 injuries, and 37 others still missing. More than 185,000 houses and 1,382 school buildings were damaged. Thousands of vehicles rendered unserviceable. In fact, one insurance company has referred to Ondoy as the most expensive learning experience for the motor insurance industry in the country. We also had to deal with the residual health implications of the flooding. The outbreak of leptospirosis, which post-Ondoy yielded 178 deaths and more than 2,200 patients. So forward now, 5 years later. My dear colleagues, last Friday, Mario, or Fung Wong, pummeled Metro Manila with torrential rains and conjured up by tropical storms and the southwest monsoon, or habagat. Mario poured down on Metro Manila 268 millimeters of rain over a 24-hour period. Once again, Metro Manila became a virtual catch basin of the deluge that poured from the skies and flowed from its peripheries. It seemed a little bit like Ondoy all over again. Metro Manila's experience with Ondoy, as with Mario, highlighted not so much the strength of these environmental hazards, but sadly, the weaknesses of our communities and our weakness in our response. This is no less confirmed by the findings of the committee. And with the unnerving statistics that the strongest, deadliest, and costliest typhoons start to come in during the final quarter of the year, this may be the opportune time to be reminded of the urgency of addressing these weaknesses in our communities and of our rethinking and reorienting our strategies to do the same. In the committee discussions, the Department of Public Works and Highways offered its diagnosis of the flood problem of Metro Manila and determined 3 major flooding occurrences in Metro Manila and the surrounding areas, which in turn were attributed to 2 main factors: climate change and rapid yet uncontrolled urbanization. The first kind of flooding is caused by overflow due to huge volume of water coming down through the Pasig Marikina River from the Sierra Madre mountain ranges and the surrounding mountain ranges of the Laguna Lake, exacerbated by the loss of watershed atop these mountain ranges. The second is the flooding due to drainage capacity constraints in the core area of Metro Manila. And the third is flooding due to the topography of the low-lying communities around Manila Bay and Laguna Lake. These 3 flooding types were all in showcase during the Ondoy floods, where an average of 3,000 cubic meters per second torrents rammed their way down tributaries with capacities of only in the hundreds of cubic meters per second. Worse, the discharge of the floodwaters was impeded by our constricted waterways and esteros, which are gilded not only with heavy siltation and obstructions due to garbage and other solid wastes, but also human settlements and communities and other man-made obstructions. Our mismanaged solid waste also further exacerbate the flooding problem as they get sucked in by the pumping stations, thereby damaging this crucial equipment. Lastly, low-lying communities in Metro Manila are not only the first to get inundated, but also the last to dry up due to their specific topography. The solutions proposed by the Department of Public Works and Highways involve both structural and non-structural interventions, which are all mentioned in detail in the committee report. The projects entailing structural intervention include river improvement, dam construction, rehabilitation and improvement of major pumping stations, and the like. Whereas the non-structural measures involve strengthening of PAGASA's flood information and warning and rain gauging systems, strengthening of community-based flood risk management systems, and timely completion and submission of judiciously crafted land use, climate change, and DRRM plans by the local government units. Reforestation, integration of water resources and river basin management, strict enforcement of our waterways easement laws. As may be gleaned from the aforementioned findings, the solutions proposed by the DPWH are mostly executive measures which primarily rest on the shoulders of our executive branch, like the Department of Public Works and Highways, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Department of Interior and Local Government, Department of Science and Technology, and the Metro Manila Development Authority, and the local governments themselves, which are not only on the ground, but more importantly are adequately equipped with the technical know-how and executive and implementing powers and the necessary funding to physically address all the aspects of the problem falling within their respective mandates and territorial jurisdictions. However, the committee has also unraveled certain key policy issues and organizational concerns that are related directly and indirectly to our flood problem in Metro Manila and elsewhere in the country, and that would aptly need prompt and effective intervention from the legislative branch. Hence, the committee most respectfully recommends the following measures for this august chamber's due consideration and immediate enactment if we really are to approach a solution to our problem holistically and comprehensively. Number one, Hasten the modernization of the Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical, and Astronomical Services Administration. Number 2, harmonize and rationalize the existing national policies on the differing uses of our land resources and strengthen their enforcement and implementation. Number 3, create the Department of Housing and Urban Development in order to maximize and better coordinate the numerous functions and services offered by key shelter agencies and the private sector, and to ensure that our resettlement and relocation programs and initiatives are strictly in accordance with Republic Act number 7279. Number 4, increase the internal revenue allotment of the LGUs and mandate their direct and timely remittances to them so that they may be able to more adequately and efficiently finance and pursue its local and community-based flood risk mapping and planning and implement its flood management projects. Number 5, legislate the creation of a national agency that shall focus on expert and systematic management of the country's river basins and watershed. Number 6, harmonize and streamline the organizational linkages between and amongst government agencies such as the DPWH, the LLDA, the MMDA, and others, including the LGUs, in order to avoid overlapping of functions relating to flood management. The appropriate Senate committee may consider undertaking a separate study and evaluation of the implementation of Presidential Decree number 1067, or the Water Code of the Philippines, as well as the roles of the Laguna Lake Development Authority, in order to ensure that our flood management is harmonized with the national policies on integrated water resource management. Number 8, strengthen the Metro Manila Development Authority through amendment of its charter, i.e. Republic Act 7924. Number 9, review and revise the National Building Code, which is Presidential Decree number 1096, in order to elevate and upgrade our standards and capacities with regard to building and infrastructure safety and resiliency. Number 10, institute green building measures to reverse and arrest our otherwise wasteful and imprudent building practices and ultimately contribute to resource conservation and environmental sustainability. Number 11, and finally, in all cases, we should ensure that our legislation and executive actions should be consistent with our international commitments and obligations, such as to the United Nations Environment Program's Agenda 21. With the aforementioned findings of the committee, this representation exhorts this august chamber and fellow colleagues to consider and be guided by the findings and suggestions not only in the course of plenary and individual legislative agenda, but also in all of our legislative actions in order to help not only in significantly addressing our flood problems here in Metro Manila, but also in capacitating and strengthening our commitments and fellow Filipinos to adapt and to survive these worsening effects of global warming and climate change. These are the findings of your committee. Thank you, Mr. President.